Well, thank you very much, Lyndall. It's good to be here with you at CEDA. Can I commend CEDA for bringing together what is an excellent forum. And I know you've had many of my colleagues here, not just from the Cabinet, but from the Parliament more broadly, and as well as having State Treasurers here as well. I understand Tim Pallas has been here and Tom Koontzen-Tonis, and so this has been an excellent opportunity, as you say, to focus on the state of the nation. And in framing this year's conference, CEDA has posed the question on whether Australia can continue its golden run of 25 years of economic growth. Now, I'm an optimist, and I'm so pleased to see my optimism rewarded. The Sharks won the premiership last year and the Blues won the first game at Lang Park last night. Optimism as a New South Welshman and as a big fan of the Cronulla Sharks. But I'm optimistic about more than rugby league. I'm optimistic about our economy. I'm optimistic about Australia's place in the world over the next decade and beyond. And that optimism is well placed because it's based on our delivery. It's based on what we've been able to achieve. The answer to CEDA's question, whether Australia can continue its golden run of 25 years of economic growth, is of course we can. Yes, of course we can. But just as before, we will have to fight for it. We will have to continue to earn it and pursue it with determination and resolve. It can never be assumed that economic growth will just happen, simply because growth has been there in previous years. Certainly the growth we have banked in recent years, we must respect it. It has been an incredibly hard one, and it's been secured in very difficult circumstances. As our global peers have struggled in advanced economies around the world, we have stayed the course and locked in growth in recent times, defying stubborn headwinds and punching above our weight. But this is our custom as Australians and as an Australian economy. But we now stand, as always, at an important juncture. Here, making the right choices are paramount to ensure that we secure what I said in the budget were better days ahead, but they cannot be taken for granted. If we want to write further chapters into Australia's growth story, we can never be complacent about it. And that is why the budget was both proactive and very pointed. It once again focused on generating growth. That's where it started, because we understand that when businesses large and small grow, Australians benefit through increased job opportunities and well-earned pay rises. We understand that when governments invest wisely in large-scale infrastructure projects, whole cities and regions receive an injection of productivity that boosts our economy and boosts earnings, what people take home and can have to be available to them to give them the choices that they want for them and their families. So to secure those better days ahead, we must make the right choices and not be intimidated, as we have never been intimidated by the obstacles that stand in our way. Now, after a few weak years, there's a clear shift occurring in the global economy, and it's been more than just a few since the GFC. Global growth has taken a battering in the wake of the GFC, as nations collectively have struggled to get back on their feet and return to trend levels and be on the path towards that. The recovery since the GFC has certainly been less pronounced and far slower than many seasoned economists had predicted. Thankfully, the downgrades in growth forecasts around the world are now becoming an exception, not the norm. After remaining subdued for some years, global trade volume growth is starting to increase, and there has been some improvement in the outlook for business investment and industrial production in major economies. Importantly, our major trading partners are set to continue outperforming the wider global economy, with our Asian trading partners in particular expected to grow strongly. Chinese GDP growth has ticked up in the early 2017, but the nation's high levels of debt to GDP continue to concern commentators. Despite the anti-Trump doomsayers, who predicted a further period of economic malaise, the United States economy is still performing well, and a continued economic expansion and an unemployment rate falling to its pre-GFC low of 4.4%. India's economy is showing remarkable resilience and is expected to remain the world's fastest growing major economy over the forecast period, with tremendous upside for the Australian economy. And then there is Japan, where an Olympics fuel boom is fostering strong growth in exports and investments, leading to the nation's unemployment rate plummeting to levels last seen in the mid-1990s. Now, of course, this renewed optimism across the globe does not come without uncertainties that could sweep the legs out from any sustained period of recovery. High levels of debt in some of our major trading partners remains a risk to the region, and that was recently noted by agencies which this month downgraded China's sovereign credit rating by one notch. But at the same time, I think these issues in China are acknowledged by the Chinese government and the Chinese authorities. And there is, I think, an awareness of that acknowledgement by other economies, advanced economies around the world, and the Chinese will take the steps that they need to take in the way that they take them. That's their sovereign choice about how they address these issues. But I would put forward that there is an acknowledgement of these risks in the Chinese economy, and we will continue to provide support, encouragement for governments, whether it's in China or elsewhere, to be taking the choices that strengthen their own economies, which in turn strengthens the global economy and Australians' own prospects. So that long-awaited uptick in global growth is, of course, good news for Australia, and we are well positioned to take advantage of this shift. And that isn't through luck or good fortune, but it is because of prudent economic management and an understanding of the crucial need to concentrate on building growth and stability. Economic growth is the result of positioning ourselves in the global economy so that when good times are there, we flourish as a nation. And when the headwinds arrive, as they have since the GFC and it's sustained over a long period of time, we have been able to be sheltered from the worst. The long unwind from the mining investment boom has been a significant drag on our economy, restraining growth under trend levels and narrowing options for business investment. That drag on the economy is almost at an end. And the Reserve Bank Governor recently confirmed that we're around 90% of the way through the downturn from the peak of the mining investment boom. And even with this lingering weight, Australia's economic performance continues to stack up favourably with the most advanced economies in the world, including other major commodity exporters. Real GDP growth is expected to rebound, we said in the budget, to around 2.75% in 17-18, after an easing in the near term as a result of the weather-related factors in 16-17, including Cyclone Debbie. Our government has taken prudent steps in the budget to revise down our expectations of growth in 16-17. We recognise that such weather incidents, particularly in Queensland and northern New South Wales, would place downward pressure on growth, which was evident in last week's construction data. Real GDP growth is forecast to rise to 3% in 18-19, buoyed by continued strong growth in exports and an anticipated lift in household consumption. While as a whole the nation is consolidating its growth, some states and territories are doing better than others. There is no doubt Western Australia and Queensland have been hardest hit by the transition away from mining investment-led growth. Across the Nullarbor, for example, business investment has fallen 30% in nominal terms since the recent peak in 12-13. In contrast, New South Wales and Victoria have been growing faster than their decade averages, supported by solid population growth, household consumption, housing starts, and a pickup in non-mining investment. Now, this is not to say there are not risks to our growth story. There are risks around the momentum in household consumption, as well as uncertainty around dwelling investment and non-mining business investment. None of these can be taken for granted. Next week, the ABS will release the national accounts data for the March quarter of 2017. In previous quarters, we have seen quite a bit of lumpiness in the data. In the December 16 quarter, for example, national accounts data rebounded strongly from an unexpected weak result in September. Although growth in the September quarter was weighed by temporary weather-related weaknesses in the construction sector, overall the weakness was relatively broad-based in that quarter. That again shows that economic growth, as I said at the time, here or anywhere in the world cannot be taken for granted. In more recent months, the economic data coming through has been mixed. We have witnessed a sustained rally in jobs growth with 7 consecutive months of job creation. And during that time, 179,000 more Australians found jobs, 37,400 people in the month of April alone. And what has been particularly welcome has been that almost 150,000 full-time positions have been created in the last 7 months. On a further impressive note, growth in private engineering construction, work done in the March quarter, was positive for the first time since the June quarter of 2015. Now, on the eve of the budget, the NAB monthly business survey saw its business confidence figures jump to a 7-year high, strengthening from the solid results recorded in the previous month and confirming a new reality in the business sector that their confidence was coming back into the black. Importantly, this was the first survey to occur after the Turnbull government's success in legislating substantial tax cuts for 3.2 million small and medium-sized businesses. Clearly, there is a deep understanding that such tax cuts will drive economic growth and deliver more and better paid jobs in this country. However, retail trade volumes, which account for around 1/3 of household consumption, rose only modestly in the March quarter. In addition, quarterly private residential construction work done fell, and with some of that reflecting the adverse weather that I've already spoken of. As we approach the end of the March quarter, of course, Cyclone Debbie in Queensland and in northern New South Wales, it hit those states hard, and it tragically resulted in 12 Australians losing their life. As expected and as noted in the budget, Cyclone Debbie will also have a significant bearing on economic activity and commodity prices. For commodity prices, Debbie induced a rapid and transient doubling in metallurgical coal prices, but given the considerable volatility that there has been in commodity prices more generally over 16-17, in the budget we maintained the judgment on the forecasts on that it is prudent to assume that prices for metallurgical coal and iron ore will not be sustained at what their recent higher levels were. That was a call we made in the MYEFO at the end of last year when we saw those prices moving, but we held back. We maintained a very modest position, and that was a critical factor in ratings agencies appreciating that the government was having a very sober look at its numbers and was taking a very measured approach. And this was supported, taking this position, by the market and industry consultation that we engaged in both at that time and as we prepared this year's budget. Similarly, we have taken a prudent stance on our real GDP forecasts, which are broadly consistent with those of the Reserve Bank and international organisations like the IMF and consensus market forecasts. In fact, the budget forecast for real GDP growth are 1/4 of a percentage point below the midpoint of the RBA's forecasts across the horizon and lower than those of the IMF. Similarly, we have revised down our growth forecast for 16-17, given that we anticipate that fallout from Cyclone Debbie. And that is predominantly because what we see through a loss of coal exports and a pause in construction. The cyclone not only significantly disrupted Australia's coal sector in Queensland, but it also damaged crops and affected local tourism. Queensland's Mackay region was among the hardest hit, losing crops of capsicums, sugar cane and fresh tomatoes. And as a result, we expect fruit and vegetable prices to rise, but we don't expect the impact on overall inflation to be significant. The price rises are expected to add less than 1/4 of a percentage point to the CPI over the June and September quarters of 2017. There will of course be more data released before we see the full March quarter accounts on Wednesday, and they will obviously have the impact that they will have, and we'll have more to say about that when we see those accounts next week. Through the budget, we are building, as part of our national economic plan that we announced in last year's budget and have continued on in this year's budget, we are building Australia. We're doing that, as I said, road by road, runway by runway and rail link by rail link. In the 2017 Economic and Political Overview, CEDA identified infrastructure investment as one of the main drivers of growth, and it has been a fairly regular chorus of the Reserve Bank governors, both past and present. Our infrastructure plan benefits every state and is set to deliver a boom in productivity across major regions that could lead to prolonged economic growth and a surge in employment. We are building 2 major infrastructure projects, the Western Sydney Airport and the Melbourne to Brisbane Inland Rail, the second of which will have significant benefits not just for Melbourne and Brisbane, but every region that is connected along the way. We're upgrading the Bruce Highway in Queensland. We're spending $1 billion on road and rail projects in Victoria, including a $500 million regional rail package and $30 million to get planning done for the Melbourne Airport rail link. The regional rail package includes $100 million to duplicate the Geelong Warm Pines line and $290 million to upgrade the Gippsland line. And we will establish a $10 billion national rail program that will stand ready to invest in proven major rail projects throughout the country. The establishment of our new infrastructure and project financing agency will assist the government also to make the right choices on funding on the right projects, which is supported, of course, by Infrastructure Australia. And the agency adds to the government's robust and internationally recognised institutions, in particular the work done by Infrastructure Australia that advise on infrastructure investments. Now, despite the fact we have to be practical in dealing with modern politics and the current parliament, as a government we will always continue to pursue economic reform. We risk our businesses becoming vastly uncompetitive in global markets if we fail to follow the lead of our G20 peers and lower the company tax rate. This new global phenomenon has seen France legislate to bring down their company tax to 28% by 2020. That was the socialists, with incoming President Macron going to take that further to 25%. The United Kingdom is heading to 17%. Singapore is already there, and President Trump recently signalled his intention to slash the US company tax rate to 15% by more than half. The extension of our enterprise tax plan to all businesses, which is back before the House, I introduced it back into the House in the week of the budget, seeks to put us on the pathway towards 25% for all businesses. But of course this does not have the backing of the opposition in the parliament, despite their once professed belief and support that these sorts of changes actually led to a growth in your economy and supported better wages, better incomes for Australians. This is a foolhardy response by the opposition to keep company tax rates at 30% for at least the next 10 years. I mean, think about it. There are two alternative pictures here. One that says Australia should have a company tax rate of at most 25% 10 years from now, at most 25%, and that we should have a top marginal tax rate at lower levels than it is now, which would be 47 plus the Medicare levy. Sorry, 45 plus the Medicare levy. Labor's alternative vision is to have one of the highest marginal top tax rates in the world at one of the lowest cut-in points for that top tax rate, and to have a company tax rate which will be, by that time, arguably, could be the highest in the OECD. Now, that is not a vision to grow your economy. Not in the least. What that is an economic mogadon. It will put the economy to sleep if we telecast that to the world, that is what our future tax regime will be in this country. And it will cost jobs, it will send them offshore. For all their ranting and raving about having Australian jobs in Australia, if you really believe in that, you've got to have a competitive company tax rate in this country. Otherwise, you are sending those jobs offshore. And you are saying to our young people that those jobs will not be here for you because they'll be overseas where companies have lower tax rates. And to all of those who work incredibly hard and have success in life, the great reward for their effort is when they reach that, what is, by even the Leader of the Opposition's own statements, by Bill Shorten's own statements at $180,000, which he says is not rich. You will have the great reward for every dollar you earn above that of working one day for the government and working one day for yourself. That is not a competitive tax regime to grow the Australian economy. It is not a prescription for growth, it is a sedative. And the coalition will always stand for having lower tax rates to ensure we encourage enterprise and activity in our economy so we can grow. Now, just turning, before I conclude, I want to touch on two other issues, one on the fiscal position and also just briefly on housing. After a few years of strong growth in some of our major cities, there are some encouraging signs, particularly for those seeking to get into the market, that housing price growth is starting to temper. A period of more subdued growth will no doubt come as a relief to prospective first home buyers and those on low incomes that feel like they are being priced out of the market for good. Only this morning, CoreLogic released data showing prices in the hot market of Sydney dropped 1.3% after recording flat growth in April. The drop was steeper south of the border in Melbourne, which saw a 1.7% reduction in prices, while combined prices in the nation's 5 state capitals backtracked by 1.1%. The recent easing, of course, reflects some of the prudent and calibrated measures undertaken by our regulator APRA to take some of the heat out of the market, which, among other things, has meant clamping down on interest-only loans. Now, given around 80% of Australia's $2.1 trillion debt, household debt, is tied up in mortgages, it is important to tread carefully when tinkering with the housing market. If you hack away at negative gearing or take the axe to other integral tax concessions, as the Labor Party continues to propose, you invite, in fact, you will on a hard landing in the housing sector. A hard landing. Now, a hard landing hurts people. A hard landing has flow-on consequences for the Australian economy. A hard landing in the housing market has impacts on not just household consumption, but issues more broadly in the economy. It is a key risk to Australia's growth outlook. It has been highlighted by every one of the external agencies as one of the big risks to the Australian economy is a hard landing in the housing market. So if you want to take a chainsaw to the housing market, you'll get a hard landing. And that's why our policy has been used the calibrated measure of a scalpel, and in particular through the regulator taking the calibrated measures that they have taken. Now, we have seen already in the most recent data a tempering of interest-only loans almost immediately as a result of the measures that have been introduced. Data released just a few days ago showed that the value of new interest-only housing loans as a share of all new lending has declined from a peak of around 46% to 36%. And there is further work to do on reducing this to below 30%, which is the new benchmark set by APRA. But even before those measures have taken effect, and for the first time since December 2009, we saw that the actual number of interest-only loans declined in the March quarter, down by 0.4% on the previous quarter. Our budget measures seek to mirror APRA's scalpel approach to the housing affordability challenge as we tighten the rules for foreign investors, give first home buyers a tax cut so they can save for a deposit faster, and provide retirees with tax incentives to downsize. But the core of our comprehensive housing affordability package is to boost supply. You don't build more houses by taxing them more. You need to build more homes to address this issue all around the country. And we need to unleash the supply of affordable housing. In our package, it just didn't deal with the private housing market. It dealt with the social housing market. It dealt with the affordable housing market with new tax incentives, both for foreign investors and Australian domestic investors, and providing new channels for institutional investors to invest in affordable housing and ensure that the inclusionary zoning policies of state and territory governments have more chances of success because there will be more take-out purchases as a result of the tax measures we've put in place in this budget to make those inclusionary zoning policies effective, which means more affordable housing for people on low incomes in this country. We'll be rewarding councils and state governments for reducing red tape and ensuring that the planning processes move more smoothly, and ensuring that then state and territory governments, working in partnership with them, will get the resources they need to pursue their housing policies. And finally, we remain focused on living within our means as a government and returning the budget back to a sustainable balance. This task drives every decision we make as a government, knowing that Australians expect us to live within our means so we can ensure that our debt is not lumped on the shoulders of future Australians. We need to respect future taxpayers. The underlying cash balance will improve from a forecast deficit of $29.4 billion in 17-18 to a projected surplus of $7.4 billion in 2021. Growth in payments has been restricted to less than 2% per year. And this is an important point to note for those who have expressed concern about the government spending. Real growth in spending is only 1.9% in this budget and over the forward estimates. But since our election in 2013, real growth in expenditure has been 2%. 2%. Now that is half the growth rate in expenditure that was experienced under the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd governments at 4%, and under the Howard government, which was actually 3.3%. But like the Howard government, our growth in expenditure has been less than our growth in revenue, and that is set out in this budget as well, which means we are heading in the right direction when it comes to bringing the budget back to balance. Now, they are the only two governments that have actually achieved that in the last 50 years. And our rate of growth in real growth in expenditure is the lowest in 50 years. That's because we believe controlling expenditure is one of the key ways to ensure a sustainable fiscal position, not just over the budget and forward estimates, but over the medium term. Such restraint and discipline puts us on the enviable path towards a compelling achievement. From 2018-19, if you look in the budget papers, what it reveals is, for the first time since the GFC, in around about a decade, the Commonwealth will no longer be issuing new Commonwealth securities to pay for everyday expenditure, for recurrent expenditure. We won't be having to borrow, as we have for the last decade, to pay for pensions, to pay for operational funding in schools and in hospitals and for departments and things like this. Our new borrowings from 2018-19 will only be for three principal items. One is for the infrastructure program that I've outlined to you, the major capital works that are occurring in the defence industry plan, and thirdly, to ensure that we don't have to draw down on the future fund for a further decade. And the result of that decision is the unfunded superannuation liabilities, which extend out to 2137, will be met by the future fund in their entirety if we hold off from drawing down on that fund for a further 10 years. If you touch that fund in 2021, it'll be gone by about 2037 or thereabouts, or perhaps even earlier. And that means we say to a century of taxpayers, we're going to make you pay for it. So it is prudent to ensure that we use the debt we can raise in the short term, which we're currently borrowing at about 2.7, 2.8%, rather than draw down on the future fund, which is earning around 8% and better, to ensure that that fund is preserved and matures to a point where it can pay down those liabilities. So we're getting on with living within our means, and for the budget, 22 bills will have been introduced since the budget by the close of today, in fact would have been already occurred by today after the introduction of bills this morning, to implement the budget. So it now falls on the Parliament. We've brought forward a budget which firstly respected the decision of the Senate to not pass the savings measures, some $14.7 billion. Of course, we would have liked to see savings measures passed, but it's a democracy. At least on this occasion, for the first time in a long time, all the senators were voted in by the Australian people because of the fair system of voting we put in place for the last Senate election. And we respect every senator that they have gained their position because they've been voted there by the Australian people. They said no to $14.7 billion. We have reset the budget and reframed it, and we are asking the Parliament to meet us in the middle. And I'm confident and optimistic that the good nature of Australian parliamentarians, on balance, will not go down the path of saying no and the obstructionism and the cynicism that we're seeing from the Labor Party, but they instead will understand that, like the government, we've been sent here by the Australian people to get things done, not stand in the way. So with those remarks, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions if there's time on your program.
There certainly is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor.